Hello, I can see a couple of attendees have joined us already. Hello, Andre. Hi, Pascal. We'll just wait a few minutes before starting the session. But for the folks online in the attendees, is there a way to, if I say, can you hear me okay, and is my sound okay, is there a way to respond and just let me know if that's all looking okay? Ah, perfect. Thank you. Okay, I can see a couple more people have dialed in. Hello, folks. So for the folks who are dialed in already, please feel free to use the chat at any time. I'll be presenting some material, but I'm happy to ideally take questions at the end. But if there are any, clarifying questions, etc., then it's quite. We're not under any particular sort of time pressure with the presentation. So please ask as many questions as you like. Okay, I'll give it another 30 seconds or so, and then I shall get started. I think there's also a raise hand option, so that could work if people want to ask questions during the presentation. I've got about 25 minutes worth of material. Okay, I think we can probably get started. So I shall start by saying welcome, and thank you very much to the folks over at Smart who are hosting me today, and for allowing me to speak for, I think, about 45 minutes. So my name is Joe Tallett. I'm from a company called Human. At Human, we protect enterprises from bot attacks. And so those enterprises can be from the sort of smallest independent websites all the way up to the largest digital online platforms. And so we kind of cut our teeth as a company in the ad tech world. We changed our name recently. I don't know if you can see from my t-shirt, but our former name is White Ops. So we rebranded about 2 months ago. So if you've heard of White Ops, you've heard of Human, because we're one and the same. So yeah, as I say, we grew up in the ad tech world. And so whilst we now work in a few areas that are sort of independent from ad tech, but also suffer from bot problems, where bot attacks are a problem, we kind of view ad tech as our home. So it's good to be talking ad tech. And please, as I say, if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask them. I'll leave time at the end for Q&A, but like I say, if anyone wants to ask any questions as I go through my slides, then yeah, please feel free to do that. Okay, so I think I will share my screen so that you can see my slides. Okay, so I'll just check. You should be seeing my my cover slide here. So please just give me a shout if you don't see that. Okay, so let's get started. So just going to get to my speaker notes. Oh, got a couple of items in the chat. Just going to check. Oh yeah, okay, good. We're all good technology-wise. Just going to get my speaker notes. Okay, so yes, so like I say, I'll be talking for about 25 minutes, and what I'll be talking about is the digital gold salters. So this is the story of the PARETO fraud scheme and what we as an industry can learn from it to keep programmatic CTV campaigns safe. And so the intention behind this talk is not to present a lot of scary statistics about the extent of the fraud problem in CTV. It is far from that. In fact, it's sort of, hopefully will be a much more kind of calming presentation than that. The intent is to give you some very concrete insights into this scheme that we found here at Human, and use those insights to understand and be able to give you practical and useful guidance for when running connected TV campaigns. So that's the first promise. No shock statistics. So hopefully that works for people. Okay, so the first thing I would like to do is explain the title. So the digital gold salters. So I'm just going to move to the next slide. Make sure that I can do that. There we go. So yes, explaining the term salting. So salting is a word which comes from the minerals and commodities industry, and it's a confidence trick that's been used by scammers for over 150 years or so. And this is the definition of it here. It's the process of adding a valuable metal, especially gold or silver, to a mineral sample taken from a mine in order to change the value of the sample with the intent to deceive potential buyers of the mine. So it's a confidence trick, and it dates back pretty much to the American gold rush. So we're talking here about the mid-19th century. And there's many stories of this scam being used successfully in the gold rush to dupe people into buying mines. And so one particular kind of anecdotal story relates to this image, which you can see now. And so what people in the gold rush would do, the scammers in this case, was that they would pack their shotgun cartridges with gold dust and then go down their mines with their loaded gold-laced shotgun, and then blast the side of the mine with this gold-laced shotgun cartridge in order to spray gold dust all over the side of their mine. And in the process, they would make their valueless mine look like it was a jackpot in terms of having gold in the mine. And so this video sort of illustrates that. This is from an old film. But it's apparently was a well-used trick in the gold rush, and it was successful on many occasions. So it's a very sneaky approach. Much more recently, it's been used just before the year 2000. There's an infamous story of gold salting that relates to a company called Bre-X. So Bre-X were a Canadian commodities company who effectively got conned by a rogue geologist who was able to shave jewelry, so rings and necklaces and the like, and shave those into gold dust, and then implant the gold dust into a rock sample that was used to value a mine in Indonesia. And Bre-X was successfully conned by this geologist and ended up buying a worthless gold mine in the Indonesian jungle for an incredibly inflated price. And that story actually made it into a Hollywood film called Gold from about 2 or 3 years ago. So it's kind of a well-known scam. But the topic of the talk today is the digital gold salters. So this is a story from right up to this year. So it's a modern day story. It's a story that we are telling, that we encountered in the last year, and it relates to connected TV programmatic ad campaigns. And so hopefully as I explain the content, you'll understand why we call this a digital gold salting scheme. So this is the scheme. It's called PARETO. So we named PARETO internally at Human. This is the name that we gave to the scheme, primarily based on the Pareto 80-20 law, which in our case, what that meant was that we effectively saw 80% of the CTV fraud coming from 20% of the kind of supply sources in the ecosystem. So we christened this fraud scheme PARETO. PARETO was a large-scale persistent ad fraud scheme selling programmatic CTV and streaming inventory. And so to pick that definition apart slightly, it was large scale in that it averaged about 650 million ad requests every day over its lifespan. And so this was not an insignificant attack. It was scalable enough to have impact. It was also persistent. So the attack lasted from very late in 2019 through all of 2020 up until April 2021, when thankfully, human in collaboration with some other partners were able to disrupt and ultimately end the scheme. But it was persistent in the sense that it was operating over that extended period of time. And finally, it was affecting CTV and streaming inventory. And so it was able to spoof inventory from all of the big connected TV platforms. So I've listed here Roku, Apple TV, Chromecast, Fire TV, Android TV. So the PARETO operators were able to spoof inventory from the broad range of different connected TV and streaming devices that are out there. So it had quite broad coverage and sort of width as well. Okay, so that is PARETO. And I'll go into the depths and kind of the details of PARETO shortly. But before I do, I just wanted to give the audience a technology primer. And so I want to talk about server-side ad insertion. So I'm not sure if people in the audience have heard of it or understand the details of server-side ad insertion. So I'll explain it anyway. So server-side ad insertion is a technology that enables the pre-assembly of independent pieces of a streaming broadcast. So that would be content and advertisements. It allows the pre-assembly of those components on a server, and then prior to subsequent download onto the connected TV device for playback. And so this is what the technology does. And I'll go over the details of kind of how it all fits together. So, 1 second. There we go. So it starts with a publisher SSAI server. So this SSAI server is the server which does this pre-assembly of the independent parts of the streaming content. And so it will take content from primarily two places. So at the top of the diagram there, you can see it will take the actual content of a streaming experience from the publisher's own content server. So this could be a show that you're watching without any ad breaks in, for instance. And what the SSAI server will also do is request ads mostly programmatically from ad servers, so from the kind of open auction programmatic ecosystem to fill the ad slots within that streaming show. And so the SSAI server then pre-assembles this content into a single seamless stream and then sends that content down to the consumer streaming audience with their CTV devices as a single video stream. And so SSAI was introduced to solve two main problems. And so the first problem was one of user experience. So when this assembly process happens on a connected TV device itself, what can sometimes result is user experience issues around buffering, because perhaps the internet connection of the device isn't ideal and therefore the switching introduces buffering. Or it could be that different bit rates of different content show up, and it kind of provides a bit of a jarring experience when an ad comes into view that's a very different bit rate or different granularity or resolution to the rest of the content. And so SSAI solves that user experience problem by solving the technical difficulties on the server side. It also solves a related problem around ad blocking. So if a consumer has an ad blocker on their network or on a device, it's much more difficult for that ad blocker to remove the ad content whilst retaining the streaming content when that all comes down as one contiguous chunk of a video stream. And so SSAI is quite a nice technique in order to thwart many ad blockers and ensure that the content that's viewed is supported by ads legitimately. So those are the two problems that SSAI solved. But it does introduce a bit of a headache for tag-based fraud detection, which is the business that Human are in. So the the problem is that effectively in a naive SSAI setup, the fraud detection tag, which gets served from the ad server on behalf of the fraud detection vendor, so that would be human in this case, is the fraud detection tag is executed on the SSAI server, which is not really the intention of most tag-based solutions, because the intention is to execute the tag and run the verification code on the connected TV device itself. But such is the way that the technologies are working, that in a naive SSAI server setup, the tag gets run on the server. And that kind of, like I say, breaks that fundamental desire to be running the tag at the time of playback, where the human is, or the, you hope human is viewing the content on the connected TV device. And so this kind of measurement limitation or vulnerability, as is often the case in our business, was quickly exploited by spammers and scammers. And sorry, 1 second. Okay, yeah, just checking to see if there's any questions. So yes, the scammers are always very quick to exploit a vulnerability. And in this case, this is what happened. So over the course of sort of really late 2019, early 2020, we saw an increase in the number of scam setups or fraudulent setups that we call a fake SSAI server. And so this visual here shows what that setup looks like. And so the scammer is running an SSAI server with a cover story of using the ads that are served to the server to perform this SSAI assembly process. Whereas in reality, the SSAI server doesn't really have any content to show alongside these ads, because it also doesn't have a real audience. And so actually all the scammers need is a fake SSAI server with a cover story, and they are able to run this scheme with some level of success. I mean, it's often obvious from other factors that this is what's going on, and that's why human are able to detect that setup. But the traditional naive SSAI setup doesn't results in some of these schemes being a little more viable. And so as a kind of a reaction to this vulnerability, a kind of an evolution of the SSAI setup was introduced, and I'm going to call that SSAI Plus. And so SSAI Plus looks like this. And the main thing to note here is the very large arrow that goes from the right-hand side to the left-hand side. And so what happens here is that the SSAI server, in collaboration with probably an SDK which sits on the connected TV device itself, works in such a way that the fraud detection tag is executed on the connected TV device rather than on the SSAI server. And therefore we've restored this desire on behalf of fraud detection vendors to run the tag at the time of playback on the device of playback. And so a couple of points to note there are that under this setup, like I mentioned, the fraud detection tag gets to run on a real end user device, but it also gets to communicate via a consumer internet connection as well. So when our code runs, we can tell that the device is sitting inside someone's home, which is one element of verification. And so this is SSAI Plus, so server-side ad insertion with on-device detection tag firing. So understanding SSAI and what I've called SSAI Plus is where PARETO comes in. So PARETO, the fraud scheme, was innovative and notable because it was the first fraud scheme on connected TV which was able to successfully mimic an SSAI Plus setup and run a fraud scheme that was effectively mimicking this visual, which you see here. And so what PARETO did was I'll describe now. So it was a traditional, if you like, fake SSAI server setup, but they had a couple of problems to solve. And so the first one is what I've called the device gap. So they needed to plug the device gap. And obviously a standard SSAI server setup doesn't have any connected TV devices on which to run the fraud detection tag. And so they had to figure something out. And so they used what often fraudsters do in our world. They used an Android botnet. And so this was a more than a set, a kind of a network of infected Android devices that were consumer mobile phones and other Android devices, which they used to plug this device gap and run the fraud detection the fraud detection tag of any vendor that was verifying the inventory. And so to clarify, the scheme was still selling connected TV inventory, but it was using an Android devices in order to fulfill the kind of requirement of running a tag on an actual device. And so this is how they did it. So they assembled their botnet by releasing Android apps on the Google Play Store. And so this visual here shows you three particular apps that were part of this scheme. So they were operated and run by PARETO. A couple of them are flashlight apps, and there were other utility apps, and the one on the right is a game. And so users would look for a flashlight, look for a game, download it, and be, generally speaking, like moderately happy with the apps that they were installing. But what they didn't know was that there was an embedded piece of malicious code in all of these apps that was under the control of the PARETO actors and enabled them to, on demand, use these Android devices as part of their wider fraud scheme. And so a company such as ours, such as Human, we wouldn't really be doing our job properly if we weren't able to quite easily tell when our detection tag is firing a running code on an Android phone versus let's call it a Roku or a Fire TV. And so generally speaking, it's quite an easy job to spot the difference for a company like ours. And so this is where PARETO kind of encountered their second problem that they need to overcome. And this relates back to the gold salting story, because this is effectively where PARETO was able to take their shotgun laden with gold dust and take it down the mine and blast their mine to make effectively worthless Android botnet traffic look like a jackpot of gold, which would be connected TV, desirable audience watching streaming shows. And so this is how they did it. So hopefully what you can see there is a piece of code. It's actually taken directly from the malware, which I just mentioned. And what it acts as is effectively like a recipe. So a list there, the yellow text there, if you can see that, is a list of particular devices which they were aiming to mimic. So they did a fair amount of let's call simple or entry-level spoofing. So you could do some very trivial things, like you would change for those who are in the details, you would change the user agent header that you send to various servers to make it look more like it's a Roku rather than an Android. They did all that, but this code is how they kind of up the game slightly and made it much more sophisticated. And so this code is a specification for all of these particular kind of devices. So you can see Fire TV there, Apple devices, Chromecasts, Rokus, and they this specifies the behavior of something called TLS. And so TLS it stands for Transport Layer Security, and it's a cryptographic protocol that is used when a device on the internet connects to another device and establishes a connection. And what the PARETO actors had done is forensically studied the behavior of these different connected TV devices in the way that they establish secure connections, such that when the Android malware did the same thing in connecting to forensic web servers such as that run by Human, they were able to successfully look like, at a much more fundamental level, the kind of device that they were wanting to mimic. And so hopefully what this shows is that they had obviously invested in research, some sort of detailed analysis of all of these connected TV devices, enabled to spoof at this fundamental level that the traffic was coming from connected TVs are not Android devices. And so I've put on the slide there, they were rewriting Android's network libraries to cover up the fact that it was actually Android. So it's a very sophisticated level of device spoofing. And so that hints at the level, like I say, of expertise that they invested in this scheme to solve the problem of device spoofing. So I'll talk next about something unrelated to device spoofing. So PARETO was also notable in the way, not just the way in which it kind of technically pulled off the job of pretending to be CTV devices, but it was also innovative in the way that it was able to persist for a long amount of time and sell its inventory to buyers within the programmatic ecosystem. So PARETO exploited specific supply chain transparency issues that exist in the RTB and programmatic ad tech world. And so what they did was they used what are called burner seller accounts. So they would set up a seat or a seller account on a SSP or ad exchange, and they would I don't know if people are familiar with the term burner as it relates to telephones. So a burner phone is a phone that a criminal might use for, say, 3 days or a set period of time before disposing of the phone and having a fresh phone in order to avoid being tracked by, in that case, I guess, law enforcement services. And so in much the same way, PARETO was selling traffic through various accounts, but would only do so for a certain amount of time to avoid having a persistent way to identify their bad activity. And so they created, over the course of the scheme, over the 1 year plus, they created many hundreds of SSP accounts. And this visual that you can see here is actually about a few days before the end of the scheme. And it shows the rotation that they use between these burner accounts. And so what you can see there is that they would only use one account, which is a particular color, for about a day before they would stop using that account, mainly because it would be flagged for fraud by human and potentially other vendors in the ecosystem, and they would move to a different account. And so they kind of engage in this sort of shape-shifting behavior or evasive behavior in order to kind of get around any supply platform that perhaps didn't have good controls around the creation of new accounts and identity. And so that was another notable aspect of PARETO, and in the way it abused, it was able to abuse the supply chain issues as well as doing a very good job of technically spoofing CTV devices. So yeah, this slide thankfully shows the happy ending of the PARETO story. So the last day was on the 21st of April this year, so kind of 6 weeks or so ago. And the story here is that following a significant research breakthrough here at Human, we were able to attribute the behavior of the PARETO malware, which, like I said, we successfully tracked and identified the scheme for an extended period of time. But what we didn't have was strong attribution to be able to take affirmative action. And so following a breakthrough in early April, we were able to identify the apps which were part of the scheme. We subsequently identified the infrastructure used. And then we actually reached out and worked with both Google and Roku to kind of actively disrupt the PARETO scheme. And so what we did was at Human, we published detailed information about the scheme in the public domain. We also worked with our customers to pre-inform them of the details such that they could take the corrective action that they needed to. And Google were able to take down the offending apps from the App Store at the same time. So we had this coordinated disruptive action. And the eventual consequence of that action is shown about 4:45 British time on the 21st of April, which is the time at which PARETO's command and control servers stopped responding after the disruptive action had taken place. And so that signified the end of the scheme. So like I say, it moved the discussion from one of being able to effectively track the scheme and block the traffic and protect our customers, to one of solving the problem for the entire advertising ecosystem by just removing the scheme entirely. And so that, that was a very sort of gratifying day at work, but it's also hopefully illustrative of how we can work together and actually solve a whole class of problems, as opposed to just looking after our own customers. Okay, and so like I promised earlier in the presentation, I want to leave you with a couple of concrete takeaways, which can help you when running CTV campaigns, or at least to understand the risks that are present in the ecosystem. So the first one is don't go, and we're adopting the kind of the gold salting analogy again here. So don't go down the mine shaft alone is the advice here. And so what I mean by that is that hopefully, as this presentation has illustrated, that identification and tracking of sophisticated salting operations like this is a specialist expertise, which is probably not economically viable to developing in-house. So we recommend that anyone kind of participating in this ecosystem work with an expert to be able to help and kind of point out and identify fraud that they might not otherwise be able to do to spot themselves. So that's the first piece of advice. And the second piece of advice is to know who's selling the gold mine. So here, what we're talking about is adopting more transparency in the supply chain, so that when a gold prospector comes to various people's doors and says, I've got a mine that's full of gold, we know who they are or know a bit about their history and are able to kind of use that information to make a reasoned decision as to whether they're trustworthy or not. And so the concrete advice here would be to adopt the transparent supply chain standards that the IAB Tech Lab have designed and released. Quite recently on CTV specifically, they released the apads.text protocol. So that's there for public use. And we also say that, as well as adopting these transparent supply chain processes individually, that we also mandate or encourage business partners involved in our ecosystem to do the same. And so therefore we kind of hold each other accountable and are able to collectively drive out the bad actors that cause this danger to the Adtech ecosystem. And so if you would like to screenshot one of these slides, then please make it this one, because this is the particular advice that hopefully should hold you in good stead when making kind of media buying decisions on CTV. So that is all the content that I have to show you. I hope it's been informative and useful and engaging. So thank you very much for listening. And we've now got, I think, 10 minutes or so, I think, for Q&A for those who have any questions. So does anybody have any questions? Just going to stop screen sharing so that I can more easily see the Zoom. So yeah, if people don't have immediate questions, then you know who I am, and feel free to ask any questions afterwards. If anything wasn't clear, please feel free to inquire. So I'll give it a few more seconds if anyone thinks of any questions they'd like to ask. Okay. In that case, I shall leave it there. Thank you very much for joining. And like I say, I hope it was very useful. And thanks again to Smart for hosting me. And yeah, have a great day. Thank you.